Legend of Total War here, and today we've got another tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering the vampire accounts. So this one will have a few spicy takes, so strap yourselves in. I don't expect everybody to completely agree with my rankings of these units, because vampire accounts can be a little bit controversial in terms of playstyles. There's very different styles of play for the vampire accounts. Some of them I would deem as extremely optimal, other ones not optimal at all. However you decide to play is totally up to you. But based on my campaigns that I've played, and I've played quite a few vampire account campaigns, there's definitely some units and some playstyles that perform way better than others if you know what you're doing. They might be more difficult to play that way, but you do get better results. So, as always, this is based off Legendary Difficulty campaign. Very hard battles. No mods, no multiplayer, based off Ultra unit scale. If you're not playing on those particular settings, then, you know, your results might vary. Alright, let's jump in and rate these. So we're going to organize it based off Melee Infantry first, then Missile Infantry, because I've got a few of those. Then Corpse Carts and Chariots, then Cavalry, then Monsters. Okay, now the Vampire accounts actually have one of the smallest rosters in the game. They're like half the size of the Skaven units, right? So you do have to make use with a sort of limited roster, but one of the benefits of the Vampire accounts is being able to raise the dead. Having units being able to just be instantly recruited depending on basically how many corpses there are in the area. So when a battle marker is created, it basically increases the quality and number of the units available there. So in the early games, you're just going to have zombies and skeletons, but by late campaign, in very high casualty areas, you'll have the full list of your roster available to recruit at any given time, which is really useful. And the corpses don't ever go away. So if you completely use up all the corpses and just wait a little bit, it'll all come back to full, which is really useful for them. Okay, so let's start talking about melee infantry, starting with the humble zombie unit. So this unit here can be made completely free of upkeep with a technology here, Master of the Putrid Horde, and that makes it immune from supply lines as well. And that's one of the optimal ways to play the vampire accounts, especially on Legendary Difficulty campaign, because supply lines is such a big pain in the ass. In this particular campaign, which I think went really well, possibly one of my strongest on casting campaigns, I've got 15 armies, right? So my army upkeep is increased by 210%, but I'm still not paying any upkeep cost on zombies and skeleton units because those technologies are researched. So it's just one way to bypass some of the difficulty that the game throws at you. So in terms of where I would put zombies, even though they are free upkeep, they still have a lot of problems. They're super slow, they're kind of in loose formation, they're no armor, no shields, no combat ability whatsoever. They have really high hit points, so they're good for missile soaks, but having high hit points is actually really bad for the vampire accounts because they rely very heavily on healing. And so there are simply better units to recruit. So I'm going to put this one at C tier. I would put it under don't recruit if it wasn't completely free of upkeep. These are useful if you've got gaps in your army and you just need to raise the dead and just fill up your ranks. Nice cheap units. Don't expect much out of them. They're really good as summons, but I don't apply summons in terms of the unit roll. So this is in terms of recruiting it and putting in your standing army, because summons can be a bit different, because the main benefit to summons is being able to summon them exactly where you need them, like summoning a zombie unit right on top of either a town square or an artillery crew can be really useful, whereas your recruited units actually need to progress a lot of ground to get there. Alright, so let's move on to skeletons. Now this is the backbone of how I play the vampire accounts, this skelly spam. You don't have to play it this way by any means, but this, after many playthroughs of vampire accounts, I found it to be the most optimal. In terms of where I would rank them, the regular skeleton warrior, which is a tier 0 unit because you can recruit them anywhere, is A tier, but the skeleton spear, which is a tier 2 unit, is the S tier 1. And it all comes down to this: completely free upkeep. That allows you to just drown the world in bones very early on. It usually takes around 14 turns to get there if you rush for it. Once you've done that, you can go from one army straight to like 3 armies, and it's roughly around the same cost. Then you're only paying for the lords and heroes. And if we have a look at a situation where I've got mostly just bones in an army, the upkeep cost, like for an entire army, is only 1,163. And it's all being paid into the Lord here. Now the thing is, you might think that's a lot of money to pay for just the Lord. Surely it would be better to have lower supply lines. Well, the thing is, the vampire account Lords are so powerful because of how much magic they can generate, and their just general abilities in battle. They're good in melee. They've got flying mounts. They've got some really good abilities. They more than make up for it. All these guys here do, their job is just to hold the line. Now, the reason why Skeleton Spears are better than Skeleton Warriors, if we have a look at the stat differences, the Skeleton Warriors have 5 extra melee attack, but the Skeleton Spears have 8 extra melee defense, and they've also got anti-large. Their anti-large bonus is plus 14. Now, the thing is with vampire accounts, if you want to cover all your bases, you got to keep in mind that vampire magic is like one of the best anti-infantry magics in the game. It just gets rid of infantry. But the vampire magic is not great against large units like giants, for example. Giants are actually pretty good against vampires usually. So using constant spams of Gaze of Nagash is really inefficient because it just doesn't do enough damage unless you're playing on like small unit scale. But having an extra bonus of 14 bonus versus large, what that means is that their melee attack is increased by 14, and it also adds on extra weapon strength relative to the ratio. So 20 to 7 ratio, it'll add on 14 extra weapon strength. So they'll do more damage to monsters and also hit more often. Now, these guys here don't have an anti-infantry bonus, and even though they will be better against infantry, what you primarily want to do, if you're going up against an all-infantry army, you just want the Skeleton Spears to hold the line and then just use your magic to finish them off. That's if you want to play optimally, which you absolutely don't have to. So that's why the Skeleton Spears are way to go. But it really just comes down to availability, because a lot of the time I'm just raising the dead. So if I take casualties, you know, there's nothing wrong with a Skeleton Warrior instead, and I'll just fill up my my gaps until I get more Skeleton Spears. Alright, moving on to Crypt Ghouls. I don't mind Crypt Ghouls. They have good amount of damage dealing in the early game, but once the enemies start bringing in armored units and large units, these guys really start to fall off. So I'm going to put it at C tier. Just a good early game unit before you've gotten the tech for free upkeep, but once you've got the free upkeep, I just don't see the point in getting them. You could put them in the Strigoi Ghoul King armies, but Strigoi Ghoul Kings are literally the worst lords for the vampire accounts, unless you're playing at like level 1. Because at least they can passively regen. But as they level up, they scale really badly because they're not good spellcasters. They don't get Arcane Conduit. They're just not really particularly good. So you're much better off with Vampire Lords. Even Strigoi Bloodline Lords aren't particularly good. Alright, then let's talk about the Canwraiths. Quite like Canwraiths. I feel like Sirens, it's essentially the exact same unit for the Vampire Coast, the Siren, but the Vampire Coast can kind of make a little bit better use out of them because they can provide extra physical resistance with some characters, whereas the Vampire accounts can do it a little bit if you own Nagashazar, which is time consuming to get to unless you rush for it. That being said, if you're playing as Heinrich Kemmler, they can be quite useful. I'm going to put it at B tier because they are good, but you do have to pay for them, and that's a big thing to consider. But they dish out good damage. Just have to watch out for magic damage. They're quite fast. Just an all-around good unit. And another thing that's really good with them is they're good to heal. Because they have low hit points and high resistance, an Invocation of Nehek is worth more to them than it is for a zombie unit or a skeleton unit, so it's quite useful there. Alright, let's talk about Graveguard. Okay, so Graveguard. Spicy take time. Trash. Absolute, pure garbage. Now, you gotta keep in mind that this is largely based off cost effectiveness, not based off pure stats, okay? On very hard battle difficulty and legendary difficulty campaign, there is very little that you can do to boost Graveguard. You will always be paying a huge price for them. Let me just see if they're available here by comparison. Yeah, they should be. Nope. Nope, they're not there. Well, if I didn't see them. No, they're not there. Well, if we just come over here. The base cost of them is, right, they're over here, 237, right, for the Graveguard with great weapons. But in this particular situation, it'd probably cost me more like 600 gold to upkeep them because of the extra supply lines. So for 600 gold, or 600 dark magic, I should say, compared to the skeletons free, like these guys here are anti-infantry, right? They're obviously stronger than skeletons, but what you got to consider as well that you don't have to just bring one army to a fight. The vampire accounts definitely benefit from bringing more than one army. So I mean, there's a downside to that, of course. You know, overloading your computer and making it go 5 frames per second. That's another big problem with vampire accounts, though. You know, if the enemy's bringing one army, you can bring 4 because it's essentially free. You can outnumber the enemy playing as the vampire accounts. And when it comes down to cost effectiveness, even if you don't want to skelly spam, you have vastly better options. At the end of the day, this is a slow melee infantry unit. They don't have particularly good stats. They do have anti-infantry, and they will kill more than these guys here. But what they don't do is deliver their value in terms of, like, just raw damage. They usually get killed fighting inferior units just because it's very hard battle difficulty. Basically, this unit here will be able to beat a tier 2 unit, but it won't be able to beat a tier 3 unit. So you shouldn't build your armies around ineffective units that don't at least punch equal to their pay grade. So that's why they're kept off. I mean, you could use it to hold the line and then use Wind of Death, but it's just way more expensive than doing it this way. These guys more than suffice. Alright, so that's all the melee infantry. Let's move on to missile infantry. So there's not much in this regard, and they're kind of Regiment of Renown units. If we have a look over here, the way that these guys are recruited are from the Regiment of Renown pool. And I would say these are like kind of like mercenary units, and you would use them only in an emergency. I don't put them in my standing armies. Like, you don't, as any particular race, it's of my opinion that you shouldn't double down on your weaknesses to try to make your weaknesses mitigated. Instead, I've found that it's way better to double down on your strengths and just ignore your weaknesses. So if you don't have access to any ranged units, that's fine, because sometimes a range superiority makes the AI behave differently. If you're bringing nothing but melee units and you're attacking the AI, they usually take a defensive position, and defensive positions are very easy to crack. But if you bring a lot of missile units, they rush at you, especially if they feel like that they have you have missile superiority. So these guys here I would only recruit in an emergency. Let's just say your settlement's about to come under attack, you can see an army on the horizon, you don't have enough Raise the Dead, but you've got some of these guys in reserve, then I'd recruit them. They can dish out some good damage, and, you know, with Vlad you could make a decent army with these guys, because he does boost them a little bit. But I wouldn't prioritize it too much, so I'm going to put them under C tier, because it's just not what your faction is made of. They're just an emergency unit only. This is like one of the first times where missile units will get lower ranks than melee unit, because it just comes down to, you know, the strengths of the vampire accounts. They don't play missile heavy, and so trying to play missile heavy in a faction that just doesn't benefit from it just doesn't work. They're going to be outranged and outclassed by missile units by other races, so just don't bother playing into it at all. Alright, so now let's talk about corpse carts and chariot units. Alright, now there's 3 different corpse carts. Let me just get them organized here. Okay, so I believe it goes like this. This is the regular corpse cart, that is the balefire, and that's the unholy lodestone. So, these are good units, but the way that I usually go about getting a corpse cart is actually recruiting a necromancer, and a necromancer can have any of these 3 mounts. And a necromancer will have Master of the Dead and extra magic abilities, providing you with arcane conduit items like the Wand of Jet for extra winds of magic. It'll also have extra power reserves, increasing your power reserves, obviously. And if they get killed, they can just revive after like 5 turns. So necromancers are definitely better. And the thing about playing vampire accounts is that fairly early on in the campaign, you can actually recruit necromancers very, very high level. So the reason why that one's able to be recruited at the maximum level, that's the maximum level you can recruit them at, is because the tier 3 growth building provides hero recruit rank +1 for necromancers all provinces, and you're definitely going to want to grow really quickly. So building this building has a lot of benefit. It's very expensive though, and so you end up getting necromancers really easily, and you can recruit them pretty much everywhere. So you just don't really ever need to recruit corpse carts unless it's an emergency and you just absolutely don't have any necromancers available. So in terms of ranking these, because we're not ranking these based off how they are as mounts either, not ranking them on summons or mounts, just ranking them as recruited units that are in your army. I'd say it's like this. The Balefire one is actually the worst one. The regular corpse cart is fine, and the lodestone is the best one. Now the reason for this is that all 3 of them have the Vigor Mortis ability that provides +5 melee attack and melee defense to all units in its like small area, right? So it's really useful for skelly blobs, which is why I usually put a necromancer in my armies. Usually, not always. Now the reason why this one here is below it simply comes down to cost. Now the Balefire, what it does is it reduces the Winds of Magic recharge rate depending on how many units are in its area. Now the thing is, the AI is really bad at using magic, and so making it run out of magic straight away actually doesn't really do much in most cases, since they're just so bad at casting spells most of the time. So this is just a low priority unit to get, whereas the Unholy Lodestone comes with the Vigor Mortis, so does this one as well. It comes with the Vigor Mortis, and also comes with extra regen in an area. So if you're using a Necromancer, you've got Master of the Dead and Unholy Lodestone, so these guys here have like +6 regen per second. Which is another reason why they're better than zombies for holding the line, because they're not taking as much damage and they're replenishing really quickly. So really good combination with that. But if you don't want to recruit a Necromancer, or you don't even have, if you don't have the DLC, you can't actually put them. Well, actually, if you don't have the DLC, you can't recruit these anyway, so that's a moot point. But anyway, okay unit to recruit, but only if there's no Necromancers in the area. Because another thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't stack. So putting like 5 corpse carts in your blob is completely pointless. I would only ever go 1 or at most 2, depending on how wide you want to go. That's entirely up to you. Then we've got the Mortis Engine. Now, Mortis Engines, I usually don't recruit them, but that's not because they're not good. It's because I'm a cheapskate. Because I have such high supply lines most of the time, these units end up costing me like 1,000 gold per turn, or dark magic per turn. But, in terms of how effective they are, just having one of them in your army, in your Skelly Blob, is definitely S tier. These are really, really good units, and I could just basically do without them because I'm a cheapskate. I'd just much rather have more armies. But if you're struggling a little bit against the hordes of infantry coming at you, these are really good, and it's especially good against dwarfs, because even dwarf lords can get killed just from the Mortis Engine effect. You want to get as many units into their area of influence as possible and just cause absolute pandemonium. Just kill a lot of them. Another great thing about the Mortis Engines, and this ability does stack, is that it increases your Winds of Magic regeneration rate. So, if you want more magic and you don't have access to more heroes, a Mortis Engine can definitely help. Definitely one of their S tier units. Alright, next up we've got the Black Coach. I'm not a big fan of the Black Coach. It's not a bad unit. I just find it really inconvenient to recruit, just because by the time I can recruit them, I don't need them. Because they're primarily an anti-infantry unit, you kind of need to cycle charge through units. You don't want to keep them locked in combat. They've got a good amount of mass. They're okay. That's really the only way to put them. If you send them up against a cavalry unit, they're probably going to get killed. They're a little bit squishy, a little bit on the expensive side. I'd probably put it at C tier, borderline don't recruit. So I'm gonna leave it there. You can do a decent amount with them. They're probably the most forgettable unit in the roster. Alright, so that's the chariots sorted. So let's move on now to cavalry. Alright, so here comes some more spicy takes. We've got, let's start with the Black Knights. We've got the regular Black Knights and then the Lance and Barding. So this is a tier 2 unit, this is a tier 3. Now, of course I was going to put them in trash. So, not only do the vampire accounts not really benefit from having cavalry, if you're going to recruit fast units to run down enemy units, that's what direwolves are for. And these guys are sort of classified as monsters, although they do kind of classify as cavalry, so maybe I'll chuck them in there. They're just not good. Like, even cycle charging into the rear of units, they struggle so hard to dish out damage. They're just crap fighters. If you're fighting anything other than archer units, these guys here just fail so hard. This one here does have bonus versus infantry, so if you were going to recruit one over the other, I would definitely go with this. But the only reason I would ever recruit them is because they're available in the Raise the Dead pool, and I just need more troops. But other than that, I would just never recruit them in my standing armies because they're such bad performers and they just perform so badly with the other teams that you can build. Do not recommend recruiting them. If you're going to recruit cavalry, you've got better options. Okay, so on that option, even though this one here is sort of classified as a monster, their role is cavalry. So the direwolves. I'm actually going to put it at B tier because these are super fast. They're great at running down archer units. I wouldn't keep them in combat for very long. They have low hit points, so healing them is quite easy. And they're just kind of cheap throwaway units where you just get them to run down the enemy artillery to get at them really quickly. That's another thing with heavy cavalry. If they don't have a lot of speed behind them, and these have 78 speed and this one's 72, so that's not too bad. It's better than Empire units. Like 78 speed's alright. Just the problem here is their actual combat abilities just totally suck. These ones here, I just feel like I can get way more kills and way more damage, way more utility out of these than I can with their cavalry. Just not good units. Alright, Hex Wraiths. Hex Wraiths are pretty good, but they're a little bit on the pricey side. They've got lots of physical resistance, which really helps. They're very quick. I think they've got 90 speed. Let me just confirm that. So, Hex Wraiths are a tier 5 unit, 94 speed. Really good if you want to heal them because they've got low hit points and high resistance. but they are on the pricey side. I'm going to put it at... I'm going to put it at B tier. If you're going to play with Heinrich Kemmler, he does a very good job boosting them because he can give them passive regen and also white blades, which is really good. But yeah, definitely not doom stackable. They don't perform well in sieges. They can do okay. That's really all I have to say about them. And then we've got the Blood Knight. Now the Blood Knight here is also a tier 5 unit. Super expensive. Even more expensive than the Hex Wraiths. Now they do have Frenzy, and they do have the Flag of the Bloodkeep, which gives them missile resistance as long as they're not in melee. They've got a lot of armor, and they do have a bonus versus large. But what I have found, considering it's a tier 5 unit, going up against Bretonia's anti-large cavalry, on very hard battle difficulty, these guys here don't win. Even like against Knights of the Realm, which are like tier 3 units. Going up against a Grail Knight, they just dump all over this unit. So by the time you recruit this unit, and the vampire counts, they don't grow super slowly, but the time you recruit this unit, I just don't think it's very good. So it's good against low tier stuff, so I think this is really more of a multiplayer unit. You know, use it to run down loads of archers. But the thing is, by the time you get it, you've already got access to Winds of Death. You just don't need it. And so it's... I'm going to put it under don't recruit, because I go through entire campaigns and I just don't ever recruit them. Basically, it's not saying that these are weak units. I'm saying that you just don't need them. And since they're so expensive, like that would have cost me like 1,200 in that particular campaign per unit. There's just other units to get, and Cavalry is just not the vampire count strong point. I know the Blood Knights are supposed to be some of the best cavalry units in the game, but they just have an uphill battle in regard to the enemy numbers that you got to deal with, the cost of it, and also the severe melee penalties that the AI have. So I just don't bother with them. All right, so that's the cavalry sorted. Now let's talk about monsters. All right, bats. Bats are trash. The only reason you would ever recruit them is to get rid of missile units, and the vampire accounts have better ways of getting rid of missile units. My opinion is that this one here is better. See, the thing is with bats is that they can't hide, whereas you can hide this unit all over the place, as long as there's trees everywhere. So you really want these guys to be hidden, and they've got Vanguard deployment as well. So do these. But if they're hidden, the AI don't target them. You just wait for the enemy to move away from their artillery, and then these guys here just go in and kill them really quickly. These guys here kill way faster than bats. Now, with Isabella, you can get bats to be okay, but I still don't recommend doing that because there's better ways to level her up. It's just not worth bothering with, so that's why I'm going to put under don't recruit. I mean, it's up to you if you want to get them, but not in my opinion. Alright, then we got Crypt Horrors. I don't mind Crypt Horrors that much. They are fairly fast, like monstrous infantry, which is really good, and they regen. But they do have kind of a combat problem, especially in very hard battle difficulty, if they're not supported. They're kind of a unit that you either need to spam, or they need to be fighting with a whole bunch of infantry near them, because otherwise there's just going to be like 4 halberdiers attacking them all at once, or depending on what they're going up against. And if you've got infantry mixed in amongst them, at least you can prevent them being constantly attacked, because they've kind of got like a longer reach than regular infantry, so they can kind of stand behind the first rank and then just keep pounding over their heads, and if they take a little bit of damage here and there, it's not too bad. They're very vulnerable to missiles, and they do have weakness to fire, which isn't that big of a deal. Overall, I think they're okay units. I'm going to put it under C tier though, just because I don't really prioritize it just due to its cost, but you can get some effectiveness out of it, especially put it in a Ghoul King, which I don't recommend doing, because Ghoul Kings suck. Then we've got Vargeists. So Vargeists are good. I like them. I'm going to put them at B tier because these are sort of like the ideal unit for sieges for the vampire accounts, because you fly over the walls and then attack the walls from the rear, and they get a charge bonus into their rear, and they can fly back up really well. They've kind of got low hit points, so it's quite easy to revive them with Invocation of Nehek, and they definitely do a ton of damage. You just got to watch out that the enemy don't have something like Pegasus Knights or anything like that. So going up against Bretonia, definitely don't recommend bringing Vargeist, because they just kill them out of the sky really quickly. But going up against the Empire, these can be very useful for harassing missile units. This is sort of like the way better variant of the Bat unit. You can get so much more done with Vargeist than Bats, and they're not a difficult unit to get to. Alright, then we got the Vargulf. Good old fluffy boy. I don't mind Vargulfs. I'm actually going to put it under A tier, because these guys are usually my go-to siege attacker if, you know, we don't have the dragon mount or whatever. Because these guys here, you want to be able to attack settlements as soon as you besiege them, not to sit there building siege towers, right? And so you need somebody with a siege attacker. Usually, you would have your lord on a dragon mount, but if they're not high enough level, having either the Vargulf or the Crypt Horror can be very useful. And these ones here, they pretty good against heroes, and one of the great things about them now, see, before, like a couple of months ago I probably would have put them at B tier, but the reason why they're so good now is because their hitbox is completely fucked. I don't know what CA did in the latest patch, but these guys' hitbox is really small for how big they are. Enemy missile units will shoot into their face and completely miss. Fireballs will come flying for you, and you don't even need to dodge it because it'll completely miss. The hitbox is completely fucked. So this is actually a really good unit for dealing with missile units, because the missile units aim for the wrong spot because the hitbox isn't where they're aiming for. So a very useful unit in that regard. But one thing you definitely need to watch out for is don't keep them in a blob of melee, anti-large melee infantry or cavalry. They will get absolutely swarmed and killed. So they do have very low leadership as well, so you don't want them crumbling, so keep them well protected. But apart from that, they're a very good unit. Then we've got the Terrorgeist. Terrorgeist, I'm going to put that as A tier. This is the closest thing that the Vampire counts can actually doomstack with. And I have doomstacked with Terrorgeist, and it definitely does work. Very good unit, but it is not cost effective to do that. It is way more cost effective to go with the Skelly spam, and even just pop in a couple of or just even one Mortis engine is way more strategically viable, because that's another thing you got to keep in mind as well, is that we have to take strategy, not just tactics, into consideration. Battles are not the most important thing. The actual strategy and what you're doing and how many armies and the positioning of your armies, and more armies are definitely better than fewer armies, needs to be taken into consideration. Terrorgeist are extremely expensive. They definitely dish out their value, but you get way more value out of these two units. And that is the roster for the Vampire accounts. They obviously have a very trash-heavy army with very few units that are viable, and which is why in this particular campaign, which went really well, if we have a look over it, I probably will have to do like a hero tier list, because the Vampire accounts don't really rely on their troops. They rely very heavily on their heroes. Their heroes are goddamn amazing. So we'll cover a hero tier list later down the track, but talking about their units, looking at these armies in this, you can check out this campaign if you want. I was like maybe 6 months ago. This Von Karstein campaign went really, really well. The Chaos Invasion was completely destroyed by Skelly spams, and some of my armies, like, I don't just Skelly spam. Sometimes I've even got a Blood Knight in there. But oh my god, look at that cost! Holy crap! Look, even the Vargulf is cheaper than it. Just that cost. I mean, I know, but Legend, you've got lots of money. Yeah, okay. The thing is, I'd have more money if I got rid of it, which means I could have even more bones. That didn't really adjust properly there. It doesn't matter. It's probably because I just loaded up the save file. Hasn't really adjusted the supply lines properly. But yeah, most of my armies are just full of Skelly spams, and even zombies are in there, just because that's what's available. And look, I've even got a Grave Guard. So, you know, you don't have to just limit yourself to just one unit. It just comes down to usually what you've got available in Raise the Dead. If you want to play particularly well, don't wait around too much to just recruit from barracks. You want to be raising the dead as much as possible, and having lots of like corpse markers all over the place. The more that there is, the better. Then you can draw really good armies. So, like, if we have a look over here at Kislev, I'll probably be able to get really good units. So yeah, look, just about everything's available there. Actually, no, I think everything is available there, because the Terrorgeist is considered their best unit. Oh my god, 1600, holy crap. But I would say that's better value than the Blood Knight. Oh my god, 1256. Just, yeah, whatever. Anyway, that's the end of this tier list here. Let me know in the comments what you think, whether you agree or disagree. I do expect a lot of people do disagree on this because of fun value. Like, Skelly spamming is boring. That's fine. I totally can, like, sympathize with that. And if you don't want to play the Skelly spam way, you absolutely don't have to. But these tier lists here are definitely designed around optimal play. And if you're not Skelly spamming, I very heavily doubt you're going to get as good results as somebody who is competently Skelly spamming. But obviously, if you struggle with Skelly spamming, then you shouldn't do it. You should always play to the playstyle that suits you best. There is no one way to play, and the last thing I want to do is gatekeep you. But the one thing I will do is tell you what does work and what doesn't work if you do it well. take that as you see fit. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time, fuckers. Bye.